Allow me to start this essay by making one thing clear. The ancient astronaut nonsense is not a theory, and its proponents are not theorists. We have a theory of evolution and a theory of gravity, even though evolution and gravity are carved in stone facts. But we call them theories because a theory is the best and most widely accepted explanation of some aspect of the natural world which has been verified by repeated experiment and testing. The word theory does not mean supposition or hypothesis or best guess, and it does not mean pseudo-religious waffle used to try to explain things we don't fully understand. And the term conspiracy theory? It breathes life into the word oxymoron. The main protagonist of the ancient astronaut story is, of course, Erich von Däniken, though lately centre stage has been taken by this chap, Georgios Tsoukalos, the co-founder of the now defunct science fiction comic Legendary Times. Their contention, seriously argued, is that the Earth was visited thousands of years ago by extraterrestrials who assisted with the construction of the many huge monuments we now see about the place. The whole concoction did not originate with them. Most of von Däniken's ideas were cribbed from two books, Morning of the Magicians by Louis Paul Wells and Jacques Bourgier, and 100,000 Years of Man's Unknown History by Robert Charroux. However, it is undeniable that von Däniken and Tsoukalos have massively popularised their junk science, bringing it to a much wider audience via the web and television shows like Ancient Aliens. Let's start by examining one piece of evidence for ancient alien visitation as propounded by von Däniken in the book that kicked off the whole boondoggle, Chariots of the Gods. Von Däniken poses the following question. Is it really a coincidence that the height of the Pyramid of Cheops multiplied by 1,000 million, 98 million miles, corresponds approximately to the distance between the Earth and the Sun? The absurdity of the proposition must be immediately obvious. Like all planets, the Earth orbits its star in an elliptical path, not a circular one, so there's no way of comparing the size of any earthly object to the distance from the Earth to the Sun. Even given that is factually incorrect. The Pyramid of Cheops was 146.59 metres on completion. It's now 137.75 metres tall. Now 146.59 metres times 1,000 million is 146,590,000 kilometres. The Earth's orbit around the Sun varies from 147,091,144 kilometres to 152,095,295 kilometres. I don't know about you, but I don't count an error of over 1 million kilometres to be approximately correct. Now, you might think that that is nitpicking. Close enough is good enough. Well, not in science it isn't, and certainly not in astrophysics. But let's have a look at another, almost identical example of this kind of woolly, muddle-headed thinking. In Chariots of the Gods, Erich von Däniken discusses the construction of the Ark of the Covenant, which he believes to be a telecommunications device used by Moses to talk to the gods, that is, the little green men from outer space. In part, he states, "Without actually consulting Exodus, I seem to remember that the Ark was often surrounded by flashing sparks, and that Moses made use of this transmitter whenever he needed help and advice." That's a staggering admission from a man who claims to be offering an alternate science, citing a reference without even consulting it. In fact, Exodus goes into minute and specific detail regarding the construction and use of the Ark, discussing everything from the size and the materials used to build it, to the robes to be worn by the priests who carry it, to the disposal of the guts and the body fat of the sheep and oxen sacrificed in honour of the Ark. Nowhere, on not one single occasion, does it mention flashing sparks. By far the most common way of putting across their point is to simply ignore any evidence that their, pardon the expression, proof of ancient alien visitation is completely wrong. For instance, this is not the skull of an alien-human hybrid. It's that of a victim of the bizarre and inhumane practice of infantile head binding, which is still practiced today. Von Däniken was interviewed by Playboy magazine in August 1974, and in that interview he states, "It's true that I accept what I like and reject what I don't like. But every theologian does the same. Everyone accepts just what he needs for his theory, and to the rest he says, well, that's a misunderstanding." Not one single scientist on this planet would agree with that statement. But if we want to see clear evidence of this blatant sleight of hand in action, we need to take a trip to three of their favourite holiday destinations: Pumapunku in Bolivia, the Great Pyramids of Giza in Egypt, and Easter Island in the middle of the Pacific Ocean. Let's go. Pumapunku is a spectacular archaeological site in western Bolivia, and the eastern edge of the site comprises a stone terrace adorned with huge, very intricately carved stone blocks. And since there's some speculation about how these huge stones were carved and moved into position, naturally, aliens. Now, the most absurd suggestion by the ancient alien fantasists is that the stones were carved by laser, despite the fact that the cut marks show the pitting and grooves characterised by being worked with grinding tools and abrasives, rather than the melting and vitrification that you'd expect to see in a rock melted by a laser. As to the carvings being millimetre perfect, which they claim, ancient aliens in fact demonstrated that. And when I say demonstrated, I mean debunked. They aren't. All of this ignores the fact that the site is littered with partially worked, incomplete stones, just like the pyramids. More about that in a moment. All of which show clear signs of being worked by cutting, grinding and abrasion, and none of which show signs of being melted by some science fiction laser. Okay, given the talent of the ancient alien fantasists to look the other way when confronted with evidence that their rather shonky beliefs just do not stand up to scrutiny, it should come as no surprise at all that one of their favourite targets is the Great Pyramid of Giza, because once again they seem unable to comprehend that ancient people were intelligent, dedicated and hard-working enough to build monuments like this, despite the fact that the ancient Egyptians left many half-finished stones in their quarries, which show us exactly how they were made. Hard work, a large workforce, and a certain disregard for on-site health and safety. They also left us clear evidence of how they worked huge stone monuments and how they moved them. Note the chap getting the easy ride lubricating the tracks of the sled. And despite what you might read in the science fiction comics about Zapatron anti-gravity waves or whatever it was, this is how the pyramid blocks were moved too. There is nothing complicated about it. True, there is still some debate about how the Egyptians built the pyramids. There are a number of theories, and quite frankly most of them would have worked. They're supported by archaeological evidence. There is, however, absolutely no evidence whatsoever to suggest that any extraterrestrial help was needed. Probably no other subject is tackled by the ancient alien fantasists with such deceit, delusion and total ignorance than Easter Island. Of course the locals were not able to carve and transport the huge statues that dot the island, so it had to be aliens. Except it wasn't. The quarry where the statues, the moai, were carved is littered with incomplete examples which show exactly how they were created. Slow, patient chipping away over years and years. As for moving them, anthropologist Thor Heyerdahl had that pump worked out 60 years ago, evidence that ancient alien fantasists simply ignore. Besides that, it's a fact that less than half the completed statues are transported to their final destination. The rest were simply abandoned where they remain to this day. Wouldn't we expect better from a species capable of interstellar travel? In his follow-up to Chariots of the Gods, Gods from Outer Space Return to the Stars, Eric von Däniken offers the following explanation for the creation and disposition of the statues on Easter Island. A small group of intelligent beings, that is, little green men from outer space, was stranded on Easter Island owing to a technical hitch. The stranded group had a great store of knowledge, very advanced weapons and a method of working stone unknown to us, of which there are many examples around the world. The strangers hoped they would be looked for, found and rescued by their own people, yet the nearest mainland was some 2,500 miles away. Days passed in inactivity. Life on the little island became boring and monotonous. The unknowns began to teach the natives the element of speech. They told them about foreign worlds, stars and suns. Perhaps to leave the natives a lasting memory of their stay, but also as a sign to the friends who were looking for them, the strangers erected a colossal statue from the volcanic stone. Then they made more stone giants, which they set up on stone pedestals along the coast so they were visible from afar. Until suddenly, and without warning, salvation was there. Then the islanders were left with a junk room of just begun and half-finished figures. They selected the ones that were nearest completion, and year after year they hammered away at the unfinished models. But the 200 figures that were still only sketched on the rock face defied the flea bites of the stone implements. Finally, the carefree inhabitants who lived only for the day, even today they are not very fond of hard work, gave up the thankless task, threw away their tools, and returned to their primitive caves and huts. Now, I would assume that von Däniken developed this bizarre racist fantasy while on one of his frequent trips to South America, in which case I would strongly advise him next time, when ordering breakfast, avoid the mushroom omelette. Now, curiously enough, this site doesn't get much of a mention in the ancient alien mythology. Doubtless you recognise it. This is Stonehenge in Wiltshire in England. It was constructed sometime between 2400 and 2200 BC. The heaviest of the standing stone weighs about 25 tons, and this is all von Daniken has to say about it. The architects of Stonehenge brought their stones from southwest Wales and Marlborough. That's it. He doesn't question the ability of the locals to shape, move or place these massive stones, he just tells you where they got them. The same can be said for the Colosseum in Rome. It was big enough to seat 70,000 people and capable of being flooded so naval war games could be staged in the arena. The Colosseum was built using the same brute force, blood, sweat and tears as the pyramids. And the same can be said for the Parthenon in Athens, which was completed in 438 BC. Some of the marble blocks used in construction weighed over 10 tons, and over 100,000 tons of marble were transported from a quarry 18 kilometres away, apparently without extraterrestrial help. But there were no substantial changes in the way huge stones were cut, dressed and moved until the invention of the steam engine in the 18th century. So, what are we left with? Apparently, ancient South Americans, Egyptians and Pacific Islanders were too stupid, lazy and disorganised to carry out this kind of work, but ancient Anglo-Saxons, Romans and Greeks weren't. Yeah, it makes you think, doesn't it? Now, it might seem a little harsh to label the whole extraterrestrial mythology as mere fantasy, but it is just that, and you can take that from an expert on the subject, Eric von Daniken. During his Playboy interview, he was questioned closely about the contents of his third book, Gold of the Gods, a blatantly fictional report of a visit to a South American cave that's stuffed full of solid gold artifacts that apparently were left behind by the Little Green Men. When confronted with the simple fact that the book is a work of the merest whimsical fantasy, he states, "In German, we say a writer, if he is not writing pure science, is allowed to use some dramaturgische Effekt, some theatrical effects, and that is what I have done." When asked point blank if he'd actually been inside the part of the cave where the fabulous gold artifacts are stored, he stated simply, "No, that is not true. That is what I call theatrical effect." Putting aside for a moment the fact that von Daniken claims to be one of those writers who is offering pure science, let's have a look at a part of his claim that crosses a boundary not only into dramaturgische Effekt, but pure fantasy. In 1938, the Chinese archaeologist Chi Pu Tai discovered graves arranged in rows in the mountain caves of Bayan Kara Ula in the Sino-Tibetan border district. He found small skeletons of beings with delicate frames who nevertheless had rather large skulls. On the walls of the caves he discovered rock drawings which portrayed beings with round helmets. The stars, sun and moon were also scratched on the rock and connected by groups of pea-sized dots. Chai Pu Tai and his assistants managed, and this is a sensational thing about the find, to salvage 716 granite plates which were 2 centimetres thick and looked very like our long playing records. These stone plates had a hole in the middle from which a double grooved incised script ran out spirally to the edge of the plate. When trying to unravel this utter drivel, it's difficult to know where to start, as von Daniken has given us so much to work on. Archaeologist Chi Pu Tai does not exist. That's not even a Chinese name. Dr. Quang Chi Chang of Yale University, who did exist, was an expert in Chinese archaeology and was clear on this point. There was no such dig in China in 1938. Perhaps forgetting the principle that if you're in a hole you stop digging, von Daniken continues with this rather lame fantasy. For 20 years several clever men racked their brains to solve the riddle of the stone plates. Not until 1962 was Professor Sum Nui of the Academy of Prehistoric Research in Peking able to decipher parts of the incised script. Needless to say, Sum Nui is another made-up name, and there is not and never has been an Academy of Prehistoric Research in Peking or anywhere else. Even without that, the absurdity of the proposition must be obvious. Nobody can translate an unknown language just by examining the symbols. Languages are not codes. It's impossible. In order to translate the mysterious hieroglyphics, you need a second or even a third language to use as a reference. In other words, you'd need an interstellar Rosetta Stone. Von Daniken seems to acknowledge some of this. When I wrote that story, I didn't have enough background information. I only had a discussion with a friend in Moscow and 2 or 3 publications. The stones exist, the skeletons also, but the names and some of the dates are wrong. It is incredible that von Daniken, that anyone, could submit a manuscript to a publisher with such unchecked and unverifiable claims. And it's even more incredible that a publisher accepted it. The so-called long-playing records allegedly found during the digs are known as the Dropa stones. They're a huge archaeological hoax on a par with Piltdown Man or the Crystal Skulls, another favourite of the ancient aliens. The only photographs alleged to be of the Dropa stones are blurred, they show no incised scripts and have no reference points to allow their size to be calculated, rather inexplicable considering their alleged archaeological importance. In fact, they are bidiscs, which have been produced in China since the Neolithic period, are well known to archaeologists, and have no mysterious extraterrestrial properties. Von Daniken states he got the entire story of the Dropa stones from a Russian scientist named Alexander Kazantsev, and he's half right. Kazantsev was Russian, but he was not a scientist. But he did have one thing in common with Eric von Daniken. He made a living writing science fiction. Speaking of stones, in one of his innumerable books, According to the Evidence, published in 1977, von Daniken almost revels in his own naivety and scientific ignorance by waxing lyrical about the Ica stones, a huge collection of elaborately carved and illustrated stones, supposedly dating back to the height of the Incan Empire in the 1500s. They supposedly show Incans disporting themselves with dinosaurs and kangaroos and giant birds, and using undeniably modern artefacts. This is what von Daniken has to say about his first viewing of this extraordinary collection. 3 large rooms are fitted out floor to ceiling with shelves upon which sit an enormous number of stones. The sizes range from that of a soccer ball to a balloon. Every stone is engraved with different motifs. One discovers Indians who ride on birds. Others are immortalised with strange tools in their hands. On one stone, an Indian uses a magnifying glass in order to better see. One of the stones is a pocket-sized globe. The outlines of strange countries, continents and oceans are meticulously incised. One depicts the process of a heart transplant. The heart of a patient lying on a kind of operating table is surgically removed from his chest. Hoses supply him with infusions. A fresh heart is inserted. 2 surgeons mend the arteries. Chest opening is being closed. In fact, the Ica stones are universally recognised as modern forgeries, created by carving the designs onto andesite rocks and baking them, appropriately enough, in bovine feces. They were made by a local prankster, Basilio Ushuaia. Upon his arrest in 1977 for selling Peruvian antiquities, a very serious crime, Ushuaia not only confessed to forging the stones, he demonstrated how he did it. Surely though in this case Eric von Daniken can be forgiven for being taken in by such a convincing and elaborate forgery. Well, no. According to the Evidence was published in 1977, and von Daniken was told that the Ica stones were forgeries in 1973. So, who told him? Basilio Ushuaia. Of course, we shouldn't be surprised to hear that the whole of the ancient alien mythology is shot through with such bogus proofs, and in not a few cases downright dishonest and fraudulent misrepresentation. In The Gold of the Gods, von Daniken breathlessly relates the story of this rather spectacular find, an ancient cave painting he states was found in Uzbekistan. This is what he has to say about it. "We must look and look again to grasp the significance of this prehistoric drawing. A creature wearing the headgear of an astronaut, the helmet well attached to his spacesuit, connecting tubes, breathing apparatus, the trappings of a space voyager, and suspended in the void, a spaceship shaped like 2 saucers, one on top of the other." Yeah, right. In fact, the so-called ancient cave painting from Uzbekistan isn't ancient, it isn't a cave painting, and it isn't from Uzbekistan, so none out of 3. It was commissioned in 1967 by the publishers of the Soviet magazine Sputnik, the Russian equivalent of Reader's Digest, to illustrate a rather hysterical story about, ironically, the ancient alien nonsense and the so-called evidence used to prop it up. I would say here that you couldn't make it up, but in this case von Daniken did just that. Okay, less of the science fiction, more of the science. Let's have a look at some inevitable consequences of extraterrestrial visits that would be hard to ignore, unless you really, really want to. Before I get to the main point, here's a trivial example of that very phenomenon in action. According to von Daniken, this is an ancient Egyptian light bulb. Now, why a light bulb would have a snake in it is anybody's guess, but where is the ancient electricity grid required to fire this light bulb up? Where are the remains of burned out and broken bulbs? Electrical filaments are made of tungsten, one of the most durable metals on Earth. Tidy folk, those little green men, eh? These are the famous pre-Columbian jet aircraft found in the tombs of the ancient Tehran Indians in Quimbaya in modern-day Colombia. They are no such thing, of course. They are rather pretty representations of local fish, sculpted with the same artistic style as this puma. This one, for instance, worn by Tsoukalos himself as a badge of honour, is a simple artistic representation of the golden nugget peiko which is found in the Amazon basin. it is not an F-15. The thing is, if they were jet aircraft, then the ancient astronaut storytellers have got a bit of a problem, because jet aircraft do not exist in isolation. Many runways, hangars, refuelling and servicing stations, barracks for the pilots and ground crew, and air traffic control. All jet aircraft, in fact all aircraft, exist at the top of a pyramid, there's that word again, of infrastructure, and neither they nor the complex support structure that surrounds them could simply disappear. But that is exactly what the ancient alien fantasists want us to believe happened. Not one single trace of these massive structures survived? That's not just idiotic. That's impossible. Let's have a look at this, the holy grail of the whole alien astronaut conspiracy. This is the lid of the sarcophagus of King Pakal, a Mayan king who died in 683. The tombstone was discovered within a pyramid in Palenque in 1952. Now, the carvings on this sarcophagus lid do not show a little green man in a spaceship. They show Pakal being transported into the underworld, and all of the iconography is represented elsewhere in contemporary carvings and paintings. But I'll leave that to others, because there's one part of von Daniken's nonsensical misinterpretation of this artwork that I would like to focus on. In part, this is what he has to say about Pakal's sarcophagus. It's pointed at the front, then changes to strangely grooved indentations like inlet ports, then widens out and terminates at the tail in a darting flame. So, this is a rocket exhaust. That's what the ancient alien fantasists would have us believe, and this is backed up by this rather fanciful representation of what they think Pakal would have looked like in his rather drafty spaceship, which is clearly powered by bog-standard, chemically fueled rocket engines. You don't have to take my word for it. This image, showing a clear comparison between the space shuttle and King Pakal's space rocket, comes from season 4 of Ancient Aliens itself. While discussing the Pakal carving during his Playboy interview, von Daniken states, "Around the stone there is a writing saying the relief shows a Mayan priest who died because of the hot wind. Archaeologists say that this shows the poor guy was sick and died in a hot summer season. I see it completely differently, that the hot wind was maybe the blast of a spaceship." Did von Daniken not stop to think about what this means? He's telling us that the little green men who created the pyramids were propelled into interstellar space using ordinary 20th century technology. Where did their ascent and re-entry vehicles come from? Did they build them here? With what? Where? How did they refine the fuel? How did they produce cryogenically cold liquid oxidants? Wouldn't some of this huge industrial infrastructure have survived? Look at this. This is the launch gantry of the space shuttle. The shuttle reached Earth orbit. This is the launch gantry of the Apollo rocket, which propelled a tiny payload into orbit around the moon. Now, for obvious reasons, these facilities were built with the most durable materials imaginable. Left to their own devices, they would last for millennia. They'd still be here. Maybe in ruins, maybe fallen to bits, but unmistakable traces of these structures would still be there for everyone to see. So, Mr. von Daniken, Mr. Tsoukalos, where did they go? So, let me sum up. Never mind the specious arguments, the non-facts and the deliberate sidestepping of contradictory evidence, let me stress this simple fact. It is beyond dispute that the little green men from outer space could not have existed on this planet without a huge industrial infrastructure if they were to stay here long enough to perform all the fanciful miracles that the ancient alien fantasists say they did. They would have needed spaceports, living quarters, factories, hospitals, oil rigs, refineries, power stations and the transmission grids that go with them, transport systems and many other structures and facilities. So where did they go? Where are the metal, ceramic or plastic artifacts? They would have lasted for millennia, but we haven't found so much as a shred of insulated cable? Please don't tell me they took all of this massive industrial superstructure with them when they went back to Zarkon VII? Lifting a single kilogram of mass out of Earth orbit requires energy, and then more energy on top of that. The space shuttle does not take its launch gantry into orbit with it. So, why did the ancient aliens not leave any trace of their visit for us to find? Well, that's simple, isn't it? They were never here.